Everything that helps works. Not everything that works helps. So do the thing that concretely helps. Systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. Cherishing is love with its sleeves rolled up. He looked at me, stood in front of the desk, and he said, "I know your heart must be breaking." And the two of us, we just sobbed. I've never really quite cried like that.
Hey everybody, it's Seano McFarland. Welcome back to the Seano Show. I don't have many heroes in my life, but I have one here in front of me today. I'm truly honored to have a truly inspiring guest with me, Father Gregory Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries. Father Boyle has dedicated his life to transforming the lives of those impacted by gang violence and incarceration through Homeboy Industries. He has built the largest and most successful gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. His work is a testament to the power and compassion, community, and kinship. He has shown time and time again that no life is beyond redemption. He has written many books. This book has changed my life. I give this book out sometimes before I give the big book of AA out to people. Every therapist and coach, this is an absolute must read. And I look at it every week to remind me what's important and give me balance. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Boy, there's a lot to cover with you. Bolivia had a profound impact on you.
Yeah, Bolivia was 1984 to 85 for 1 year. Then I got really sick. I had to come home. And then I was just ordained a priest in 84. So I went, kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. And I went down there ostensibly to learn Spanish or improve it, I guess. And then I just fell in love. And immediately I was, in this community that hadn't had a priest in 25 years. And we had these little comunidades de base, these small groups of, people who would meet and we'd reflect about life. And so we did a lot of things. So anyway, it was just a magnificent experience. It was the poorest country in the hemisphere, poorer than Haiti at the time. And it was just going through the most extraordinary period politically, and people were really quite suffering. And yet I found that, in terms of the poor evangelized me, they just kind of turned me inside out. So I was supposed to go to Santa Clara University to be campus minister or something. And then I just begged my provincial, please don't send me there. Nothing against them. It's not enough. And so he said, well, I need somebody at Dolores Mission, where I had spent a summer. And that was the poorest parish in the city of LA. So I said, please, yes.
And what is that instinct in you, Father, that I don't want to go to that Santa Clara? I'd be grateful to go there, but I want to go to the most difficult, scariest place.
Well, I don't think it was so much in terms of scary. It was that there was something about being in the proximity with the poor, people who were totally abandoned and cut out and ignored and kind of deemed of no value. And there was something about walking with them that changed my life, even for that brief time I was in Bolivia. So I was so grateful. At first I thought, I would come to Dolores Mission. I'd be kind of the third guy on the totem pole. But it turned out I was going to be the pastor. So I was really quite young. In fact, they never
How old were you then?
Well, I was 31. Nobody is named a pastor at 31. So I was the youngest pastor in the history of the diocese.
Oh, wow.
Really, really young. So, but because nobody wanted to go there, it was quite an intense place, that really, people were quite stressed out working there and didn't last very long.
Wow.
But I was happy to be there.
Let me just go back a little bit. Probably. When did you get tapped and know I'm here to serve? How old were you?
Well, I was taught by the Jesuits. So I was, I just loved them. They were hilarious and prophetic. They were fearless and joyful. And so they were all the things I wanted to be. And so I'll have what they're having. So I was young, for sure.
Wow. Wow.
But it was, I just loved the spirit of them, and the combo burger of prophetic, fearless with real live joy. I suppose in the early days I thought it was just high hilarity because they were really quite funny, and I liked being around them. But then afterwards I thought, no, this is really comes from a deep place. At Homeboy, we always the homies talk about, here at Homeboy we laugh from the stomach. And that's the concept, which is really a deep kind of place from which to experience joy and to share
You
it.
have an incredible ability to use humor as a great medicine. It's a real art.
Yeah, well, I think it's essential to be attentive to how things are quite funny.
So let's start with, being at Dolores and kind of walking us through the invent of Homeboy.
Well, in the early days, so that I was there the summers of 84 and 85, and then I was pastor in 86. And so 86 to 92. And in the early days, immigration was kind of the thing, because those were the days of dividing families and deporting folks in families who didn't have papers. There was the Immigration Reform and Control Act. A lot of family division was going to happen as a result of that. People talked about the amnesty, but it was really dividing families. And my parish was so undocumented. So that was what the first 2 years were. But by 88 was when I started to bury kids a lot. And that's when Homeboy started. We called ourselves Jobs for a Future, because it was mainly just, we started a school and then we started a jobs program, trying to find employers willing to hire felony, if the people who were felony friendly,
Felony friendly. I love that.
And so we did that for a while, which was kind of a little half-assed as I look back on it, because I think we discovered that an educated inmate may or may not go back to prison, or an employed one may or may not. But then I'd say 15 years ago, we decided, and really with great determination, that a healed gang member will not reoffend. So then we shifted to who we were. Before it was nothing stops a bullet like a job. That's what was our T-shirt and our motto. But then we thought, no, this literally was happening, where we found careers for gang members. And then suddenly that guy's lady would leave him, and that it just threw a monkey wrench in the works. And now that guy's at Folsom Prison for the rest of his life.
Because he didn't have the skill set to deal with that.
Well, he didn't have he wasn't sturdy. He wasn't resilient. Right. He hadn't healed sufficiently, to be able to withstand what the world is going to throw at you. So we do an 18-month, we call it 18-month training program. But if you surrender to that essential foundational healing, recognizing that healing ends in the graveyard for all of us anyway. But if you surrender to that, then you can leave us after 18 months. And the world is going to throw at you, for sure, all sorts of things, but you're not going to be toppled. This time you won't be toppled. But we were finding people being toppled, and we thought, well, this isn't enough. We still have the menu of services that a lot of places have: job training, therapy, and tattoo removal, and classes, anger management. All of that is secondary to the core cultural healing. And once you kind of dive into that, if you surrender to that, it's going to really work, because it's going to help, and everything that helps works. Not everything that works helps, but everything that helps works. So do the thing that concretely helps.
So many things that you talk about, didn't work, and you would just learn from them. You kind of joke about, who would have thought about the plumbing program?
Yeah.
Could you share about this?
So I always say, we started all these, and not everything worked. I always say Homeboy Plumbing was not hugely successful, because I suppose ostensibly people weren't enthralled at having gang members enter their homes, I suppose. But yeah, that was just a cheap joke. But yeah, so you want to try to find, we would bounce from kind of job opportunities to other ones. We started a bakery only because there was an abandoned bakery across the street from our school. Tortillas we were in Grand Central Market. There was an empty, kind of tortilla machine. So, and I was there to get jobs for kind of janitorial jobs. And I said, well, what is that? They go, well, it's a tortilla machine. I go, well, why don't you lease it to us for free, $1 a month or something. So he did, and Homeboy Tortillas was born. I mean, that was a black hole. That lost a lot of money. But all the things kind of just sort of evolved that way. I think we have more intentionality and clarity and planning now than we did in my early days. But
now, to talk about, so many of my listeners, they need hope, they need persistence, never giving up. I mean, the bakery burns down. And what's going through your head at that time?
Well, that was October of 99. And so the bakery was born in 92. And
7 years.
So it was kind of, starting to find its way. And that was in the first 10 years of our existence as an organization, where we got death threats, bomb threats, hate mail. People really...
From law enforcement, right?
Mainly
law enforcement.
Yeah, and people who demonize gang members. Never from gang members. It never made sense for gang members to oppose us, As much as people think. They think, oh gosh, you're taking our soldiers away or something. But that's all mythic. But if the populace demonize gang members, it's a short hop to demonize me and Homeboy for helping them. So it was really intense. So the bakery burned down in that period, where, I would write an op-ed piece about, if only we could be smart on crime or see gang members as human beings, whatever. And there'd be an onslaught of death threats, bomb threats, hate mail. I mean, really quite extraordinary. Hard to retrieve it now, but it was pervasive.
And how did you not let that affect your mission?
Well, because we were kind of close to the bone and connected to the community, and
it was working. You knew it was working.
Yeah, but it was also, success. I kind of agree with Mother Teresa on this one, that we're not called to be successful. We're called to be faithful. So if you're faithful to walking with people, what difference does it make? Evidence-based outcomes, I don't care. This is the person, the person right in front of you. Mm-hmm. But when I look back on that, because I have a book coming out in November, and I think it was the first time I was able to look back. And so you ask about the bakery burning down, and that was a tipping point where on October of 99, bakery burns down, and the LA Times the next day does a, editorial that says Homeboy Industries doesn't belong to Father Greg Boyle. It belongs to the city of LA. And as I look back on that now, many years later, that was the impetus, where all of a sudden money came in. That had never happened before. Senators and, people were allocating whatever, federal funding. That's why we were able to buy the location where our current headquarters and bakery, and, so let's rebuild the bakery. And I think, in the old days, it's starting to resurrect a little bit again, unfortunately, but you had the tough on crime versus soft on crime. Well, if those are your choices, everybody's going to pick tough, because nobody wants to be soft on anything. Mm. But Homeboy posited the notion that the choice is really tough on crime or smart on crime. And then people went, I'd rather be smart. And that was kind of the first time that happened, I think, in LA County, where people went, yeah, let's be smart. So then they got underneath, and what are the issues that undergird this symptom of gang violence? And so people started to address the lethal absence of hope. They said, well, what if we infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign? What if we helped heal trauma? What if we delivered mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. So suddenly things just broke open. And then it was like for the first, also gang members, really saw this as an exit ramp, whereas before people are shaking their fists at gang members and about the violence, but there was no way to get off the crazy violent freeway. And Homeboy kind of, galvanized the imagination of the gang member, said, oh, wait a minute, maybe I don't have to do this. Maybe I can get off, which was kind of new.
That's so beautiful. Like, I walk me through this. I get from you meet people where they're at. When they come in, you meet them. They don't feel judged. They don't feel shamed. They feel loved and cared from you from the gate. Can you talk about that process when somebody comes in, the most hardened people? You see their heart, you see their soul, you see their little boy, you see their history. Can you talk to me about how you connect with people and help guide them towards freedom, towards sobriety, towards not returning to prison, towards being a good father, towards trying to have a different relationship with their family?
I will always say, I'm pretty convinced that I heal nobody, but I think the place that people find healing there. And so that's important because then it's a culture. It's part of the air you breathe. Homies will call it an aroma. It's a lot of those things, all hands on deck. Everybody's dosing.
Yeah, I love that.
Everybody's providing a dose.
Getting the dose, right.
Yeah. Otherwise it becomes the Godfather will see you now. It's like you come in and see me. It's really not that. The place is really alive with that culture. In fact, people who visit will say, what is this?
Right.
Because there's a kind of a thing that
There's an energy there.
They can't put their finger on it.
Right.
The energy is really brought to you by everybody participating.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something to that. But in general, if everybody walks through those doors with a disorganized attachment, mom was frightened or frightening. And how are you going to calm yourself down if you've never had the experience of actually being soothed? And if you come in there and you're barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, as you mentioned, there's no judgment and there's no shame, then what scales that wall but tenderness? So suddenly people are tender with each other. And people, even if you're new, you're watching tenderness happen. And then that becomes the highest form of spiritual maturity for people, where you say, yeah, I want to be tender. In spiritual terms, you would say, I receive the tender glance.
No, it's beautiful.
And now I'm going to become that tender glance in the world. That's your intentionality. So I've been at this for a long time,
Yes, you have.
40 years, and you can. So I always have to catch myself, because we always talk about, like Jose Ariano, our
beautiful Jose,
friend.
we love you, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, but he would talk about, okay, that homie, you fought with him right now because he took you to that place. We always talk about that. How do you not allow yourself to be taken to that place where you rile up and you go, you want to take people on rather than get underneath, find the thorn underneath, the homies always say. If you find the thorn underneath, you're not going to be taken to that place. And so it's like Pema Chodron, who always talks about catch yourself. You have to catch yourself. So I find myself, I'm in that state a lot lately because someone will text me and come at me sideways and I want to go, F me. Oh, hell no. And, and you go catch yourself. So I had about four.
That's great.
I had 4 texts this morning where
catch yourself.
I had to catch myself.
Yeah.
And which is a good thing,
Pause is, people always ask me, what is the spiritual awakening and recovery? I said, the ability to pause.
To pause. To just take a breath.
Step back.
Yeah.
Step back.
And this person's coming at me as nobody should ever come at somebody. And yet, it's not it's an indicator, and don't be tripped up by it. So anyway, that comes with doing stuff for a long time. I'm not sure you even become better at it. It becomes even more pronounced because you've been in this situation a million times before and you kind of know how it plays out. But catch yourself, pause, which is excellent. And so that you can, keep it new. It's like beginner's mind is such a hard thing to maintain because you've been at it a long time.
Yes.
And you kind of think there's nothing new under the sun, which is a trap.
You love people until they can love themselves. You talk about once they learn how to be cherished. Can you talk about that? I love when you talk about being cherished. Once they feel cherished.
You find different, there was a homie who was talking about, he had a word, which he called languaging, which I'd never heard before. And he said, I try to study languaging. And I thought, well, that was interesting because you find different ways of saying things, and like my book is called Cherish Belonging. And my editor didn't like the title. He just wanted belonging, of which there are 93 titles named belonging, but never mind. But cherish was the key thing because, I would say systems change when people change and people change when they're cherished. And so cherishing is love with its sleeves rolled up. There's something about it that's truly active, truly engaged. It's what relational wholeness is always about, where you're cherishing people. So at Homeboy, you want to create a place that's safe, where people are seen, and then they can be cherished. Because in the end, that's the only thing that will propel people to a place where they can discover their true selves in loving. If you're cherished, you're kind of cherished into that. You're cherished into knowing that, wait a minute, loving is my home. And once you know that loving is your home, you're just never homesick.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You're never lamenting the love that you're receiving or not getting enough of, or like home is the place where you've received the most love. No, if loving is your home, you're never.
Oh, that's beautiful. You feel safe for the first time in your life.
Yeah.
And we need to feel safe.
So homies who've been in prison a long time, and in particular, would say, we're all used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And so once you can get them to a place where they're seen, it's hard to do. I think cherishing is not hard. Remembering to cherish is exceedingly difficult. So that's why it's part of your practice, like even guys in recovery who will say one day at a time. I go, whoa, no, that's way too long. A day is too long. And that's why you connect the cherishing to your own breath, that you cherish with every breath you take. That's what the practice is. But it's and practice doesn't make perfect, but it can lead increasingly to habitual, which is what you hope.
Right.
Really, really hard, I think. Easier to say.
What do you say to family members coming in? Their kids are struggling with addiction, or the kids are strung out, they're mental, and the parents don't know what to do. What's the messaging that you try to teach them?
Well, they're, especially in the Latino community, you'll have a señora come in, a mom, ay padre, no hay que hacer. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to find a way out of this. And then I said, well, what's happening? She goes, well, my son is, using meth, And I said, well, where is he? Oh, he's at home in bed. I go, so no amount of us wanting him to not do this anymore.
That's great, man. Right.
Will ever be the same as him choosing not to do it. So, you even at Homeboy, even though it's a building, perhaps, although it's more home than home for a lot of people, it's still being clear is very loving. So you go, gosh, Jessica, we love you so much, but you can't come into the building right now because you're using meth and you stopped taking your meds, so you're volatile and you're kind of triggering all sorts of people there. But boy, do we love you a lot. So much so that we can't let you into the building, And she'll act out and go nuts. But there's the door marked recovery. We'll help you enter that door the minute you want to do it. So I think, how is that different from that mother who's at her wit's end? It isn't different. You kind of say, oh, I love you so much. You can't live here right now because you're using meth all the time. We'll do everything we can to get you into that place where you can stay for 6 months or whatever the prescribed amount of time is, right? But until then, I don't know, a park bench, or I don't know what you're going to do.
Right. And it's just that's the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
And so people say that's tough love. And I always think, no, that's clear. Clear is better than tough.
It's beautiful. Right on.
Because you want to be clear.
It's clear. It needs to be ultra clear.
Yeah. And it's never at any point rejection or shaming or less than loving.
Love you, son. I just can't live here anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love you so much that you can't live here.
Can't live here anymore, son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that could change tomorrow.
Right.
And then part of it is closing doors. Every door is closed except the one marked recovery. We'll help you walk through that door. But if I just go to church more, no, that door's closed. If I just had a job, no. You have to do this first.
Beautiful.
It's hard because at Homeboy, we're constantly testing and there's lots of relapsing. And, we always say the same thing. We go, look, and that's what we were talking earlier about finding beds. Okay, we got a place for you. And do 90 days.
Right.
And then come right back to us. And sometimes they say no, and they go, oh, but it's in your hands,
Uh-huh. You're so humble, Father, about all the things you've learned, all the mistakes you've made, changing your approach. If I understood this correctly, I think after 10 years, you had a big revelation. Like, I've been going around on my beach cruiser, and I had a shift in consciousness. And could you talk about that? Because it had a big impact on me.
Well, it's like yesterday I was at Roosevelt High School and for this event, and they were asking me questions. That was one of them about regrets. There's so many things I don't ever regret, and I'd never do them again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a difference. So I don't regret that I had shuttle diplomacy, or I tried to, put that Uzi down. Are you sure you want to shoot that guy on my bike, patrolling the 8 gangs? I don't regret that.
Right.
And I'd never do it again.
Right.
I love that. Because it served the cohesion of the gang, which I didn't really see. I saw that was in fact supplying oxygen to gangs. And that seemed clear to me not to be a good thing. So then we shifted, and it was, come see us when you're ready.
When you're ready.
Yeah.
When you're ready.
Or even if we have to let somebody go, because usually it's because of a relapse and they refuse to go to handle it and deal with it. And we'll say, well, come back when you're ready. We love you. We think you're great, but come back when you're ready. There's nothing wrong with not being ready. It's just timing. And
right.
When you can embrace that as the path that you need to walk, come right back to us. But so there were those things. There was there's a kind of a notion called hardcore gang intervention, which I don't agree with, because I did it and I saw what it did. And I saw that it's not helpful, because that's kind of the key. I talked about earlier that I can remember a guy touting a program which was really working with gang members on the streets and negotiating and truces and ceasefires. And I remember he was at a conference in San Francisco on gangs, and he was pounding on the podium. And he says, look, this works. And I remember I wrote in my little program there, I said, yeah, but I bet it doesn't help. And then that was key for me, because I thought not everything that works helps. but everything that helps works. So find the thing that's helpful, and then you just do the next loving thing. Then you just put one foot in front of the next. Concretely helpful, as opposed to lots of things that work that are horrifying, And I think law enforcement approach to a lot of things, sometimes you would go, wow, that works. Look at the numbers. Yeah, but it's horrifying. Yeah, you don't want to do that. You could make a case maybe to say that mass incarceration works, but you could never make the case that it helps. And so helping always trumps working.
And didn't you in that time just really come this? It's never about you.
Well, that was another moment. That was when I was kind of close to burnout, and where
Oh yeah,
where a homie who had a dream, his brother had killed himself. He was in rehab. I went to pick him up to take him to his brother's funeral, and the dream was he and I were in a room with no lights or no windows, pitch black, but somehow he knew I was in the room. And he said, and in the dream, you pull out of your pocket a flashlight and you aim the flashlight steadily at the light switch on the wall, and no words are exchanged, but I'm just aiming the flashlight. And he says, I know I'm the only one who can turn that light switch on. I'm really grateful that you had a flashlight. So as he's recounting the dream to me, he followed the beam of light to the light switch, and he stood there and kind of a deep sigh, and with great trepidation, he flips the light on, and the room is flooded with light. And now he's sobbing as he's telling me this dream he had. And he said, the light is better than the darkness. Like he didn't know this to be the case. And then he said, I think my brother just never found the light switch. Oof. And I've never had an experience in all my 70 years of living like that one, where I said to myself, I get it. The source of my near burnout was that I've been trying to turn the light switch on for people.
Right.
And you think that's noble and good and right. And here's the light switch, and I turn it on. And suddenly you're content to know that we all own a flashlight, and we all know where to aim it. And that has to be enough. And suddenly it was enough. I knew exactly what I had been doing wrong, that I was trying to turn the light switch on for people. And I stopped. And I can honestly say that I've never been near burnout since then. Because turning the light switch on is about me, always. And it can't be about me. Mm-hmm. So the minute you do that, you go, now I can go to bed. I can go to sleep at night. Yeah.
Right.
And so it's a totally different thing. So if you go to the margins to make a difference, then it's about you. But if you go to the margins so that the folks there make you different, then it's about us. It feels passive, but it isn't. Because if you're going to the margins to reach people, then it's about you. But if you go there to be reached, then everybody, in a way that's really exquisitely mutual, everyone is inhabiting their own dignity and their own nobility. And there's nothing passive about that. That's the whole thing. That's why the feeling is mutual, where it's not saving, rescuing, fixing. It's delighting, receiving who people are, Otherwise, this is why people burn out, because it's so aligned with success and evidence-based outcomes. It's difficult because funders only care about that stuff, and we can't care about that stuff.
Right on.
You just can't.
Can't do it.
Because you'll lose your way. It's a tough thing to straddle, because somebody at Homeboy Industries has to care about evidence-based outcomes, but it's not going to be me.
Amen. Right on.
But
I love it about
in as
you.
much as they do data,
sure.
And but if that's your engine, before too long, you're going to stop working with the people that you set out to work with and walk with. And you're going to start working with folks who are going to give you better outcomes, which means you've abandoned the people who are, even, you know, in your experience, like in rehab or recovery, you know, I don't know, what would you think of a program that didn't have people leaving? Do you know what I mean?
You're right.
It's almost a measure of, in some odd way, a measure of our fidelity that you have people who are relapsing, who leave, because that's
nature of the illness.
Well, that's as it should be in a way, you know.
Right.
Because I don't know, do people ever talk that way? Do they ever say, you know, we run this recovery center, we have 100%.
Yes, they do, and they charge a lot of money, and they're generally in Malibu.
Yeah,
85% guaranteed rate.
Yeah. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, it is insanity.
Yeah.
But like you, I don't get involved with that. I just keep doing what I'm doing here.
But it's like running a school for kids that nobody wants to educate. And then pretty soon you have a board, and the board is saying, well, how many of them go on to universities?
And how many get their masters?
I think we had one, maybe. and then pretty soon, a couple of years in, they're saying 100% of our students go on to college. Well, of course, because you're only accepting the most likely to go on to college kid, you know.
Well, you bring up something that I'm just going to add to that, Father. The one thing I believe, you'll of course tell me why Homeboy is so successful. People trust you. They trust you. And and that's a big deal. It's hard to gain trust.
Yeah, I think so. I think they trust the place. You know, I always try to remove
they trust
myself.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I think they know that this place is not gonna.
Well, they feel seen. People need to feel seen.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Safe, seen, and cherished. I mean, I think safe is
seen,
really
and cherished.
key, because when they walk in the door, they're looking around. They go, I don't know, am I safe here? And they may not know that they are yet. You know, they will know.
I could get it wrong, but I remember one, I don't know what, I think Dianne Feinstein was maybe running for governor. I'm not sure. And she wanted to come visit you guys.
Yeah.
Visit the homegirls. And you proposed this to them, right?
Well, this was when I was pastor, and this is not the homegirls, but the women.
The women.
Women in the parish.
In the parish.
And they had this campaign to go into their kids' rooms, lift up the mattress, grab that Uzi, and then bring the gun down to the church. So we had these big gun events where people would be throwing guns in a big trash can. And she was running for governor, and she saw it, and she wanted to, you know, kind of meet with the women. So I remember I went to the women who only spoke Spanish, and I said, you know, this candidate for governor wants to visit you. And I presumed they would say, oh my God, you know, we're honored, thrilled. And they said, no, they said, if she wants to come here and tell us what to do with the problems that we face, dile que no venga, tell her not to come.
Yeah. Right.
But if she's going to come and listen to us
and hear our stories,
because we're close to this and we know what we need to be doing, tell her to come. And she never came. I think she thought it might be a press event from hell or something. So she kind of said, no, I'm not going to go.
So that's what I'm talking about. You created a culture where they just felt so listened to and cared for. And
I think, it's important. It's hard to nurture it all the time.
Yes,
and keep
it is, of course.
Alive and flourishing, but that's the challenge.
You've had thousands of addicts pass in and out of Homeboy. What's the characteristics of people that stay sober and have a good life, don't return to prison, don't relapse? If you could break it down, what have you seen over the years?
Well, I think it has to do with surrender. You know, we have a lot of returnees, like even Jose Arellano, I keep putting him on the front page, but he was, and he'll admit, you know, it took him several starts and stops and starts and stops, and now he's vice president, you know. But I remember, I never heard this before. A homie said to me, I said, why did you know, it took so many tries. And he he said, I just couldn't handle the love that I found here, which I thought was interesting.
Right.
That would be
It's too much.
It was too much for him. And he left and relapsed or went back to prison. So I think it's kind of that, but surrender is kind of the opposite of that. If you surrender to the foundational healing, and part of that is to you kind of have to agree to the excavation, where you're going, everybody has just huge wounds and trauma and unspeakable pain that they haven't gotten near. And so part of the love that sometimes is unbearable is a light that's kind of helping excavate a wound that needs to be aired out and clean. And so if you're willing to do that, there was a period of time that I always found kind of startling, where gang members who were addicted to gang violence came to Homeboy and suddenly found themselves addicted to drugs in a way that they had never used drugs before.
Oh, it's so interesting.
And I think, again, it was because of...
Makes sense, right?
You're numbing the process of the excavation. So we've had a lot of struggles with, like, for example, marijuana. There was a time you test, you have to be clean. And now we kind of don't sweat the marijuana so much when you enter, but then we go 30 days from now, we want your levels to be lower. It's kind of the times in which we live, in a way, in the hope that you're still going to work towards not numbing your pain at all. Harm reduction.
Harm reduction.
Yeah. So there's a kind of a sense of that that's different from how we operated before, know. But then you kind of also tie some things to it. You're going to be part-time because your levels are still too high of marijuana. Obviously, the flags are any other opiate or meth or heroin, anything like that. That's we're going to take a time out. We're going to offer you rehab. We hope you accept it. So, but that's kind of the thing, because the process is if it's foundational healing, then you're by nature, you come to terms with what was done to you and come to terms with what you also did. And then that's how the healing happens. But your original question on this was, how do you kind of, who is the person who ends up being sturdy and resilient? It's the one who surrendered, to the place.
We have a saying here, Father, shame on them for doing that to me. Shame on me for staying that way.
Yeah.
Because we like to shift the narrative. We refuse to be our sad stories here.
Or to be locked into a victimized
mentality.
Yeah.
I believe I have this right. You said if the addicts could hear the shrieking of a mother after they just lost their son to overdose or murder, it might change their mind. Could you talk about that?
Well, that was in the early days when we had shootings morning, noon, and night, and really quite intense. And I, at one point, buried 8 kids in a 3-week period. So in the projects, this was a constant. And there was that moment, there was the lag time, when somebody who was shot was then declared dead, at the hospital, which was where it normally happened. And I was there with the mother and their, surgery or whatever they're doing, and he didn't make it. And then there's this a kind of a Latina shriek that comes from the earth, and so I used to say the homies are never there to hear that. And then once this kid, we called him Bear, and the mother stayed at home. There were other siblings who were at the hospital, but I went to tell her that he had died, that this kid Mario Bear had died. And the homies were all there outside the apartment and the projects. And she, shrieked in a way that was just primal. And I remember, I think that's where I wrote on that, where I said, and that was the very first time that I recall that the homies were there to hear that sound. Normally they weren't. And because they were distant from hearing that sound, they were all involved in revenge and anger and fury, but they didn't hear that sound. And I remember looking at them as they heard the sound and how to their core it was so uncomfortable for them to kind of shift in them, you know, kind of say, wow, what is this about? And how could it possibly be worth that sound, you know?
I think if I got this right, I wrote this down. Freddie, after one of the homeboys was murdered, came into your office. Freddie and
yeah, I changed all the names, so I never know.
I got it.
The name is never the trigger thing. Say more, and then I'll know who it is.
What you talk about there is, I think you said something. I've never cried like that before with somebody. He was coming in to talk to you about what happened.
That was the second of our graffiti removal crew team who was killed. And then I was at the hospital again when he died, the mother, family members. But I was aware, I had spent hours there already, and I thought, I got to get home and to kind of tend to the office because this kid was much beloved at our office. So I got there just like 15 minutes before 5, where everybody's leaving the office. So it was very, you know, people were sobbing and people were hugging me, and you maintain a certain amount of trying to be there for them.
Sure.
And then I thought I was alone, and I was in my office by myself, and I was just kind of letting it all in. And when this kid came from our little conference room in the back, his name was Chino. I don't know. I guess I must have called him Freddie. But he looked at me, stood in front of the desk, and he said, I know your heart must be breaking. And the two of us, we just sobbed. I mean, I've never really quite cried like that. And he cried and I sobbed. And then he said, all of us are in a river and we're drowning. And you swoop us up. We started crying all over again. Yeah. And then he said, on everything I love, if somebody offered me $1 million or a chance to swoop you up, I'd swoop you up.
Wow, man. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, haven't told that story in a long time.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And it's funny, of all the people who would choose to swoop me up, and that's what I said to him. I said, you just did. You just did. And of course he did. Easily 3/4 of my gray hairs are you know, he was the one who brought them my way. I mean, he was just a knucklehead. Isn't it funny that he was the most attentive, you know, and yet, you know, he was so hard. He was in his addiction, and he was, you know, I was trying to get him into a rehab, and he texted me and he said, hey, G, you know, can you give me, you know, I need some money, and I don't know what it was he needed. And I said, son, you know, other people might give you money, but I love you so much, I'm not going to give you any money. But I'm willing to take you right now to rehab, because he was drinking so much. This was many years later. And then I said, of texting him, look, I know that you've burned a lot of bridges with your family and your friends. I'm telling you right now, the day will never come when you burn this bridge with me. That'll never happen. So I press send, and he writes me right back, fuck your bridge. And that was one of those lessons too, where you feel the sting of it.
Yeah.
And then once you feel it, then you let it go.
Right on.
And then I just howled with laughter. So then the next day at our senior staff meeting, our little meeting we call it the council. And Jose was at that meeting. And I told them that. And then it became this shorthand for, like how it would kind of, they would hug me and they'd whisper in my ear, "Fuck your bridge," and we would howl with laughter, like oh gosh, that really moved me, and how it became this shorthand for affection and which was hard to kind of to arrive at in a way, but you kind of, if you cling to those things and to getting butthurt, as the homies would say, or getting bent out of shape, or we just found it really kind of funny.
I've had many texts like that.
Yeah.
And you have to wrap your arms around it.
Yeah.
And love them even more.
Oh, yeah.
Because you understand.
And then allow it to be as hilarious as it is, because it really was quite funny. Not initially, but 3 beats later, it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard.
Father, someone comes into your office and he says, you're talking about faith. And he says, I don't believe in God or Jesus and he said, but I want to have faith. What do I do? How does someone find, what do you instruct them to do there?
I don't think God has much interest in it, so I don't have much interest in it either, truthfully, because I think in the end, where is your true self? Your true self is in loving. And this is why I think the brilliance of the 12-step notion of higher power, I don't think it matters much. It doesn't to God. It's however you get there is fine. As long as you can find your true self, you want to find your truth. And that's always going to be in loving, where you choose to let love live through you. And that's where the joy is. So that's the whole thing. So that's what God wants. And from my own point of view, doesn't want worship me,
Sure.
It's never believe in me, have faith in me. I don't think it's any of that. God's dream come true is our kinship, community of cherished belonging. No us and them, there's just us. And you discovering the truth of who you are. So that you can live from that place. That's it.
That's the entry point for you?
Yeah.
Right on.
But otherwise, it's like somehow God is wanting, you to go like this. I go, wow, where would we get that idea?
Yeah.
Because God is more self-effacing than we are, and if we were God, we would want people to praise us. But God only wants joy. Or as Jesus says, my joy, yours, your joy complete. That's it.
Oh,
it's not, here's what I'm hoping is that you'll worship me, which is crazy. But that's where people get stuck. They project onto God, this puny notion that somehow God, just wants to be praised. And you go, well, we would want that if we were God, but that's just because we're human.
Who's one of your greatest teachers?
So for 40 years, I've, walked with gang members. So they've always been my primary teachers. But you had people in your life, teachers, literally teachers, or people who you admire in terms of, like Cesar Chavez, a privilege to know him and be a friend with him. And Jim Lawson, who recently died, Reverend Lawson, who taught Martin Luther King about Gandhian principles of civil disobedience. And he was a mentor. So you have those people. But I would say primarily it was homies over the years. Yeah.
Okay. I was at that event at UCLA when you were there with Pema Chodron.
Oh, really? Yeah.
How did that relationship form? And could to tell listeners who Pema is? Yeah.
Well, Pema is a Buddhist monk, I guess. But she's just a light, she's I can't remember what happened. I read her a lot. And then I think she read Tattoos. And then I'm in my office and I look out and there's, kind of a saffron robe, a shaved head, woman sitting underneath the TV. CNN is on, the room is packed, and she's in this one chair. And I went, oh my God, that's Pema Chodron. And I said, what is she's here to see you? And I go, oh my God, bring her in. And so, and she was with her daughter. And I don't know, we just became fast friends,
Wow.
And then,
The light of Homeboy drew her in, huh?
yeah. So, she's always kind of sending money and, cause has her foundation and she's just she's amazing. So I think she said, well, let's do something together. Yeah. So then we had that thing at UCLA. So we write each other. She has a kind of a, she's in Nova Scotia or wherever the heck, somewhere cold, for the cold period. And then she'll come, she has kind of someplace in Colorado, I think. And then she comes, visits her daughter in Southern California. And so I don't know, over the years, we've just maintained a friendship. And I love her humor. Isn't that the oddest thing, because she has wisdom and insights, but her humor says everything to me, because she has kind of a light grasp on things, so she becomes, for me, very, she's so human.
I think, like you, she has the ability to goof on herself.
Yeah.
And not take herself too seriously.
Yeah.
That's a real beautiful thing. You've talked recently, I've read articles, and I'm certainly facing this. It's a different game out there, the fentanyl crisis, mental health. And you talk about going into different places and you just kind of see people just checked out, and how are you guys tackling that over at Homeboy?
It's hard. And I would say it is quite different, because we start to get to this language that we've never used before, where we say beyond the scope of our, beyond the scope. They'll say, I think he's beyond our scope, which I don't really like much, because we've had lots of people who are beyond our scope, but with enough dosing of cherishing love, people come around. There are tons of people who have gone through our place or who are still at our place who, again, it's more home than home. And that's okay. You just don't want a critical mass, because then it ends up impeding the growth and health and progress of everybody else. So that's tough, but I think that's what we're in. We're in, exacerbated by the pandemic for sure, but we're in the grip of a real mental health crisis. I mean, how else do you explain, and not to get political, but do healthy people, want to have a dictator, want to live under a dictator or an autocrat? You just go, no, I don't mean people are dumb or people are bad. I believe everybody's unshakably good and we belong to each other. So these aren't judgment calls so much as health assessments. I don't think you can be healthy. And last night, Barack Obama was kind of talking about, people saying that, that other Americans are vermin. And he said, when did that become okay? And in a sense, it's about morality, I suppose, when he asks that question. But for me, it's about health, So if you talk about 300% increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes, and I go, well, no, this is not about hate. This is about health. If we think it's about hate, we will not make any progress except shaking our fist at hate. Just say no to hate. I believe in love, not hate. Then it's about you and you're not that helpful. I'd rather let's do something that helps. But it's about health, not hate. Like Ram Dass talks about, we're all just walking each other home.
I love that.
So how do we walk each other home to health and wholeness and fullness and joy? Let's just walk each other home. You don't have to say, here are the bad guys. because there are no bad guys. There, not everybody is at any, none of us are well until all of us are well. So how do we help each other move towards health? Otherwise it's just more us and them, and it's demonizing. And demonizing is always the opposite of truth. And I would say the opposite of how God sees things. And so you want to, I think if it's about health, then we're okay. It's okay to say, it's okay. How do we move each other towards a kind of health where you will feel more full and whole and joyful?
Beautiful.
But don't you think that's true?
I'm right there with you.
I think we're
yes.
at a different place. Again, in 40 years with gang members, I've never seen this moment.
Right.
And it's, you can say fentanyl, and you can say, I've just never seen this level of mental anguish and distress than I have now.
Just out of curiosity, when are you your happiest?
Well, I love being at the office, and I don't have much balance in my life because I'm on the road a lot. And that's enjoyable too, especially if I'm bringing homies or homegirls to help and watch them get up in front of an audience. Like I just had 2 guys speak to every single judge in the state of Indiana. And, just, oh my God, standing ovations for these guys. And they just love them, and rock stars, And they just got up and humbly told their stories. And it was wonderful. So that stuff's joyful for me. But I love being in the office,
Why?
Because it's everybody's coming in, and there's a sameness to a lot of it. I'm just short $200 on my rent, sameness to it, but it's always fun. It's always affectionate. It's always heartbreaking. It's always full, Like yesterday, I was there the whole day, and I got home. I was exhausted, not burned out, but exhausted. And I thought, wow, I wouldn't trade my life for anybody's. That was just so rich, and you stand in awe at what people have to carry rather than judgment at how they carry it. And you go, wow, I've never had to carry what she is carrying or what he is carrying. But then you feel just
gives you energy.
Yeah,
right
totally gives you energy.
Any final thoughts for our audience, and how can people support Homeboy?
Well, I hope if you're in LA, just come to the headquarters, because it's really worth seeing. Come for morning meeting, which is kind of joyous, from 10 minutes to 9 to about 9:05. Or come to the cafe or support us that way. It's important if people walk through those doors, because I don't know. I think Homeboy sometimes, is really the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in, So you get a taste of, wow, look at this. It's black, brown, men, women, gay, straight, enemies, multiple enemies. Everybody has multiple enemies there. And it's kind of this big old hug fest. And in the bakery, enemies who used to shoot at each other, making croissants together. And yeah, so it's kind of something to behold, because then it galvanizes the imagination. Then you kind of go, okay, I see this. Yeah, this is what we're meant to do. Quite apart from supporting Homeboy, I think it also, it announces a message about a community of cherished belonging, which is where we all want to be.
Right on. Final thoughts for those that are in the light and struggling right now?
I think part of it is there's a duty to delight. If we can just, if we intend to do that, if we choose to delight in the people in front of us, and to go where love has not yet arrived, and cherish who you find there. I don't know. That's what keeps us vital. I
cannot thank you enough for making it down to Venice today.
Oh,
we consider ourselves an unofficial Homeboy satellite office.
Yeah, no, that's sweet.
So
I appreciate
we're going to try
that.
to maintain the principles that
you do.
You've been an incredible teacher, and your kindness today is well appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, beautiful. Wow. The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarlane, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Kornelek. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.